दुनिया से ये सुकून
Good evening. Welcome to another episode by Silent Majority. Today's episode's about mother-in-laws and toxic mother-in-laws. Now, I think it's universal that all cultures across the world have issues between. There is a fraught relationship between the mother-in-law and the wife, so to speak, the daughter-in-law, and that's inevitable to some degree. I don't want to go into their differences, but particularly in the South Asian culture, there is a fraught relationship that occurs between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. We've got a guest today, a very brave and bold guest that has her own channel, Muslim Women Issues, and that's been going on for about a year or so now.
Yes.
A year or so, year and a half. Yep. So, and it's sort of this channel. She's the founder of this channel, and this sister helps particularly Muslim women that are going through marital issues, domestic issues, and one of the key concerns that this sister, on a day-to-day basis, addresses with other sisters that are married is the toxic mother-in-law. So, without further ado, I'd like to thank my main sponsor, Hyan Estate. If you've got a land, if you've got a property that you want to rent out, or if you're looking for a property, reach out to them. They're reliable, trustworthy, and they'll always give you a good deal. And also Simplex Coaching. If you are having any sort of issues, reach out to them. They do counselling and coaching. Now, right. Thank you, sister. Thank you for joining us. So, Muslim Women Issues is a platform that does help sisters and Muslims address whatever domestic issues they may have. Today, I want to focus on toxic mother-in-laws, and I think this phenomenon is again universal, but particularly in the South Asian culture, it's very strong, and there is a lot of emphasis with the mother-in-law within a marriage. So you're here to tell us about your experiences when you were married and how your mother-in-law affected your marriage. And also, we need to take lessons and draw lessons for people in the future and currently that are married that are having problems, as well as sisters perhaps looking to get married in the foreseeable future, and how to address or tackle the mother-in-law issue. Obviously, the dynamics have changed, but nevertheless, it does exist. And I think it wouldn't be too strong for me to say that it is an endemic. Right. So my first question to you I'm gonna ask you about your personal experiences. Tell me about when you were married and how that went.
Obviously, being from a cultural background, we go through a traditional process, and I should have been made aware from the beginning that I wasn't her first choice. So I wasn't the ex-mother-in-law's first choice. She actually wanted to bring her niece over, and I think a lot of people can relate to that.
When you say niece over as in niece over from another country, or?
Exactly. So
Okay,
she
sure.
wanted to introduce her niece as a potential wife for her son, and he obviously preferred to marry me. And it was actually when we had the initial meetings of the family that the ex-mother-in-law mentioned it to my mum. So my mum tried to warn me, I guess, but I, in my head, was quite confident that we had been very aware that we wanted to marry one another, and bringing it to the family meant that we wanted to cement it and get married and have the nikah done, obviously, and then the big wedding with the family.
So one of the big alarming concerns here is that your mother-in-law from the outset didn't want you as a potential suitor for her son.
Exactly. And I guess that's what set off how she was going to treat me as soon as I entered the family as the daughter-in-law.
Right. And just after you've been married now, tell me the dynamics of relationship. Did you stay with your mother-in-law?
Yeah, so I had a traditional mindset. I went in and knew that I was going to be living with the family, and the problem started pretty much immediately. One of the first things I remember was trying to make him breakfast, and she was in the kitchen at the same time making traditional cultural breakfast, and I was making them all kind of what I was used to, the toast and the beans and everything else. And we were both taking it into the living room at the same time. And I remember presenting him with two lots of breakfast and just completely sort of taken aback with, what is this? He's my husband. It was the weekend. It was our first weekend together. And I was running into competition. That was very strange for me.
Just with the competition element, and I did mention initially that I think throughout all cultures in the world, there is some sort of inevitable competition between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. in this instance, it seems a bit more acute. Firstly, she doesn't like you from the outset. She does.
Yeah.
You're not her choice, and now this breakfast element of thing. So your son, and I think this is a phenomenon as well, whereby a mother would vie for her son's affection or attention. When another woman comes into that fold or sphere, it naturally becomes a repellent for the mother, right? So when you say competition, I think that's natural to
Yeah.
some degree. But in your instance, how did that competition play out?
I mean, it was really bizarre for me. I didn't understand what was going on. I think the fact that we're two different generations, what she must have been accustomed to and used to, and what I was definitely thinking what married life might be like. We had two very different, experiences, and mine was starting to resemble something that I was just thinking, I don't know how to behave. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. The expectations from me, do I take good care of my husband and be the one who's like making his meals, or it started to become quite strange for me. I think as the weeks progressed, there were definitely more and more incidences, which made me realize that this isn't a normal reality for me anymore. For most of the beginning of the marriage, you get to do the honeymoon period, you get to know your husband. He changed dramatically, and I found that I was more and more sort of responding to what my mother-in-law wanted from me, as opposed to what my husband and I were going to try and build together as a couple. So that was very strange
So
for
it
me.
was a three-way relationship. I think for my audience's purpose, and they'd like to know this, you say competition and you didn't know what your role was. I mean, you came in with a perspective of this is what a wife is supposed to be for her husband, but because of, may I say, interference from your mother-in-law, your role changed. So what is it that she initially took over from your role?
Um, I think one of the first things that I noticed was these sister-in-laws. So this family had a lot of sister-in-laws from the immediate cousins, so his first cousins' wives. And there was one particular one who my ex-husband would bring over on a Friday with her two kids. They would stay Saturday and Sunday and leave on Sunday night. In that time, that was the only time we could have spent time together. So the mother-in-law, the sister-in-law, and my ex-husband would go out to do some shopping. They'd be out the whole day. In that time, I and my sister-in-law, who is my mother-in-law's stepdaughter, we would be in charge of taking care of the kids. I would be told this, and this needs to be cooked. There would be like 4 things soaked in the sink for me to cook. And pretty much that was my whole of my Sunday. They would come home with all the shopping, which we would have to put away, and we'd have to serve them. And yeah, the whole of the Saturday would all be around what their needs were. And then Sunday again, it would be serving teas around the clock, making sure there's new curries cooked. We only were allowed to go, when I say we, myself and my ex-husband's sister, we were only allowed to go into the living room when all of the chores had been done. And we weren't allowed to come and mingle with them. They would always be in the living room playing cramboard. They'll be watching movies. They'll be socializing and all of the fun that would be going on. But I would always be in the kitchen cooking. Yeah, it was just really bizarre.
Forgive me, but it sounds like you've described a maid and your job, it was more of a job for you rather than a relationship. So I asked you that, what is it that your mother-in-law did as opposed to you, but rather what you've told me instead is that she set out the requirements, almost like chores that you had to do. So it was cooking every day, 3 or 4 curries or dishes, cleaning, and that made you feel like a maid in the house.
I would say maid, and then further as the weeks progressed and became months, I realized I was actually a slave because I
Wow.
wasn't allowed to leave the house. I didn't have a set of keys. It was made very clear to me by the mother-in-law, I'm not allowed to even go to the next door neighbor's house. Obviously, being in a very sort of Bengali community, there were lots of people that were coming and going all the time on the same floor. All the aunties would be popping in and visiting and saying to me, come round, come round. And I was told you're never allowed to leave the house without anyone's permission. When I would go to my parents' house, I would come back and find all of my things had been rummaged through. There were things taken out from each drawers and put into different places. I was told specifically by the mother-in-law, you've taken far too much space. He doesn't have space for things. Shoes and all of my things were rearranged. My personal space was invaded. And I think as I talk about it now, I really want to raise awareness to what is right and what isn't right. So absolutely, there are rights that a Muslim woman has, and that's what I've started to promote more. But yeah, my own experience is what
You've just said a lot
highlighted
of
it.
things there. Wow. I do think your experience, perhaps, you can tell me otherwise because you have sisters and women coming to you on a day-to-day basis with their concerns regarding the mother-in-law and wider issues. Your situation seems very acute, as in an extreme level, and I'm sure mother-in-laws aren't as toxic as what you've described. It does one does have to beg to ask the question: where was your husband in this? Did you not answer to him?
Um, Gosh, he was very quiet. He was working Monday to Friday. His routine would be he'd come home from work, he'd eat something that I'd prepare, and he would then sleep. And when I say prepare, I'd be instructed to go and make sure that there's like an after work snack, and then the times were set, so we'd then serve up dinner, and then after dinner there'd be another further snack. It was just like a lot of food. I couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. There'd be constant kind of like, and you need to go and do this now and serve up this now. It was really difficult. He didn't want to know, and I think eventually it was too much for me. And when I went to stay with my parents, I started telling my mum some of the stuff that I was really upset with. The complaints would start about me, and there was this first sit down kind of meeting where my dad was called over, and there was
Sure.
complaints about certain things that I wasn't doing enough of. And I remember in this meeting, the youngest brother-in-law actually turned around and I said, "Where's my husband? I married him." And in that heat of what was being discussed and all the expectations around, and she's not doing this, and she doesn't wake up on time, and she's not good enough. And I remember saying, "But I married him. Why, I don't get to see him. I don't get to spend time with him. The weekends come and go. And I didn't marry like the whole family. I married him." And that's when the brother-in-law turned around and said, "No, actually, you didn't marry him. You married the whole family." And that, I think that was the first realization, like, oh gosh, what have I walked into?
Wow. In terms of your psychological, mental health, as well as the relationship your relationship between you and your husband, without a shadow of a doubt, the experience that you're having and the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis will influence in a detrimental way of how you are with your husband. Did you not feel comfortable enough to express these concerns you were having? And then obviously he's not blind. He's seen the dynamics in the household. Did you ever think to bring it up to him? And I'm sure you did. I'm just asking the question.
I did, and it just, went nowhere. We ended up fighting more, and there were lots of other things going on, obviously, in our relationship. I think for me, I thought I was praying that would be a turning point when we fell pregnant with our first, which was about 3 months into the marriage. By this point, I hadn't left the house. I only went to my parents' house, and you can feel that like that daunting feeling every time the end of the stay over was coming, and then driving up back to the house and
Back to
going
prison? Can I
back to
say
prison.
prison?
It was awful. The feeling in my gut, and I'm sure there are sisters out there who can relate to this feeling. It is the worst feeling when you don't want to come back from your parents' home, and then you're driving towards where they live, and that feeling like, gosh, what am I going to go and face now? She never liked it when I went and stayed with my parents. The whole time I was there, it would be like, when are you coming back? When are you coming back? She'd phone me every
She'd
day.
call you rather than your husband.
Yeah.
So she's missing you, bless her.
Yeah, I don't know what she was missing because I mean
Well,
we didn't
clearly,
we
I
didn't
know
have
what she
any
was missing.
conversations. Yeah, it was the cooking, I guess. But yeah, I would always come back and know that something in my room would be amiss. Very soon after we got married, I mean, the gold was kept under lock and key. The money that you've been given on the the platter by all the family, that was just taken. Yeah, there was a family wedding that happened soon after ours, and I was told I'm not allowed to go to the event before the wedding, the Mendi. I wasn't allowed to go to that, and that was really upsetting for me. And the whole week leading up to the Mendi, I remember saying to him, like, "Can we talk about it? Can we talk about it?" And he just stonewalled me. So come to the actual event, and I looked at him and said, "Can we go? Everyone's there. They're all missing me. They want to see me." And he just said no. He said no. And I remember just kind of sitting there crying, and that's when his brother woke up and saw me really upset, because I'd have to serve him his morning coffee. And that's when he said, "Why are you okay? I could tell something's not right." And I didn't tell him, so he asked his sister. So she then said, "Oh, there was a family Mendy, and mum didn't let her go." At which point he kicked off and said, how could you? This is her family, and you guys are crazy. And his brother was trying to shut him down, and his mom was really angry, and like she would have this look on her face. She was always scowling. And then he was like, right, I'm going to get you there, so get ready. So I had to get ready in 5 minutes, and then he took me in. By then the Mendy was over anyway.
So there are some noble men that live in that house. Was she ever physically abusive towards you? Or is it more verbal abuse?
Oh my goodness, the verbal abuse was really bad, and I didn't understand the language, I'll be honest. In the beginning, my Sileti was really poor. And because the sister-in-law, she's from back home, she'd only been in the country, I think, less than a year before I joined the family. So they share the same dad, but have different mums. And she was like the state before I was. And she would translate for me. So there was an incident when I think something to do with the dishes, and the slur that she used against my parents, when my sister-in-law explained to me what she said, I was really upset. And then a few days after, a neighbor had come, and around the neighbors, I didn't have my hijab on. I felt really comfortable to be around women. And she then went to abuse me in our language again because my hair was colored, and she was just trying to call me again really bad derogatory terms. And I just couldn't understand it. I was like, why are people so mean? Like,
It beggars belief.
yeah.
In spite of all this, did you try and reconcile your differences with your mother? And I'm going to take a punt here, because usually how things work, and I'm not saying I'm a trained psychologist, it's the victim that's been abused that actually tries to reconcile, makes amends with the perpetrator. So I'm sure if you, in this case, you're a victim, that you even try to, do some sort of gesture to extend your hand out, the olive tree, as they say. Any of that happen? And how was the response to that?
Well, I mean, being as young as I was at the time, 21, I know it doesn't seem like such a young age, but I lived with my parents. So I lived in a bubble, if you like. My parents protected us from a lot of things, didn't see the world at all. So going from one place to another, and seeing this whole new kind of outlook, she would complain to my mum about all the things I wasn't doing enough of. And my mum would tell me, and almost like telling me off, like, how can you bring shame to us like this? So then I would just go, okay, fine. So I'd set my alarm earlier, and I'd get up and I'd start the cooking on an empty stomach. I'd make sure that everything was done. I would ask her a million times, like, is this okay? And shall I put in this much salt? And is this amount of powder okay? Like, just to avoid...
Did it appease her? Was she satisfied?
The more you try to do, the more complaints. My mum eventually got fed up and asked me to get a mobile phone because I didn't have a mobile phone. So the calls would come from the landline.
By the way, this is 2000s England,
2004.
England, you haven't got a
Our
mobile phone.
traditional mindset, like I didn't need a phone because mum had the landline she could call me and find me on. So mum would be respectful, call up the house, make sure that everyone's been asked about, and then she'd ask for me. And mum just got fed up of hearing endless complaints about me. It was almost like...
In spite of you doing everything and more.
Yeah. And, the complaint was even, oh, I've told her she needs to wear a sari around the house every day and she doesn't wear a sari.
Your situation seems very acute, and I think women, daughter-in-laws, are leaving their husbands for a lot less now. I think you're on one end of the extreme scale, and the extremities that you've described, I don't think ordinarily, even within the South Asian Muslim culture, mother-in-laws are as bad, from what you said, right? But I do think there is a strong correlation between the way the relationship is with the mother-in-law and a culmination of it to lead to divorce. And I think it does affect the husband and wife marriage, because if the son, for argument's sake, in this instance, and we can draw it back to your story and your experiences, if the son has given up complete power, carte blanche to his mother, and his mother calls the shots, and that means controlling you and dictating whatever she may, you automatically, naturally will lose respect for your husband. And the reason why I asked the loaded question about appeasing your mother-in-law, that becomes your leader, and she becomes your leader, and it's more appeasing her as opposed to your husband. Your husband becomes like just a figure in between, the intermediary.
Yeah.
So I've heard a lot of experience, and I'm sure people have come to you to tell you that because of the mother-in-law, I can no longer be compatible with my husband because I've heard terms such as he's not a man.
Yeah.
You know, his mum calls the shots.
Yeah.
So just talk me through. Just come away from your experiences for a second. The cases, the sisters that come to you with cases, not as similar as yours, perhaps. I'm hoping a lot less than what you've had to endure. What is it that you advise them? Because I'm sure some of them have led to divorces because of the mother-in-law situation.
Absolutely. So this is where I explain the laws of attraction and also some sort of generational trauma that's almost continued for the mother-in-law down to now me. And what happens in this scenario is during the courting stage, obviously the laws of attraction, the man's taking the lead, he's organizing the dates, he is trying to impress her. And that's what happens. And they fall for one another and then they take the steps to get married. Ideally, Islamically, they've both educated themselves on the woman when she becomes an age of maturity, she has to have a wali that represents her. For the man, he just needs to go directly and ask her family for permission, especially her father, if he's alive. That conversation, that essence of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed the man to do, you don't need a legal representation for you. The woman does. This is what men have to recognize and understand. Allah has given you the opportunity to step up and say, I'm a man, I'm ready for marriage. And you just need your parents' blessings. And I think culturally, a lot of blurred lines around what the man has to do for his parents. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said a man has his rights as soon as he recognizes that he is within his essence of being a provider, protector, spiritually, he's able to guide his wife to, on the deen and beyond, all of the things that it's already written in the Quran. He then just needs to marry her, impress her family and then marry her and then bring her into his family. And that's all. The minute the man then starts to ask permission from his mum or his dad or anyone else about what can I do with my wife, this woman is starting to lose respect. And I hear that a lot. Men say, I want respect, and women say, I want love. But then the minute the man marries her and takes her into his family, he's now not being a man. So for a woman to really feel truly attracted to this man and continue to respect him, he has to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked him to do. And he needs to look to the sunnah for the actual lessons, the teachings from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about how to be a father, a husband, everything that, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. And in this essence, a husband. So I think definitely those are the things I talk about on my platform. I talk about the mum, the matriarchal figure in the family, who is the one who actually emasculates her own son. And at this point, the father, if he does have a father around, he's become a very muted version because she becomes very territorial over her child. Because in her mind, she's thinking, you didn't speak up for me when I was experiencing abuse. Now it's my turn to be a mother-in-law, and this is my daughter-in-law, and these are mine. And she kind of has this whole kind of, this thing that's manifested in her over the years and years and years where she was going through her own abuse. So there is some element of empathy towards the mother-in-law, but this is manifesting into continuing that generational trauma onto the next. And it takes one person to recognize this, call it out for what it is and say, this needs to stop.
Wow, beautifully analysed. The causal link you made between a mother-in-law and therefrom usually the mother-in-laws that are around, obviously we're second, third generation now, and the mother-in-laws are first or second generation British. But if you're looking at an immigrant mother-in-law, they had to withstand and endure horrific. I wouldn't go as far as to say torture. It wasn't torture, but they were the definition of a slave maid. And what's quite interesting and very notable that you said because they had to endure it, they essentially mete it out themselves, or dish it out. Projections. So it's a manifestation, and it's a cyclical trauma where they think, because I've taken it for so long, why shouldn't my daughter-in-law take it as well? Because it's the way of life. I do think there is a bit of vindictiveness in that and bitterness in that, but I get your point. The theory stands, and I think it has some credibility. Another interesting thing you just said now is that the mother-in-law, the toxic mother-in-law, the father-in-law, and this is my analysis, and shoot me down if you wish. When the father-in-law is emasculated because his mother-in-law and father-in-law abused his wife, and then his wife is doing it to his daughter-in-law, I think there's a pattern there. And I think the pattern is that the boys that are growing up in that household, and they're used to, accustomed to their father being emasculated, they almost absorb that as well, and they maintain that as status quo.
Yeah.
So you quite rightly said, Allah and His Prophet, peace be upon him, have talked about the essence and the primacy of a man being a leader, particularly within his family. So when you do hand that over to women, in spite of having the leadership role, and then that sort of transpires into your children and so on and so forth, you're creating generations of emasculated men.
Yes.
And may I say, yeah, this is an assertion, that it's those men that are the ones that have these problems, where there's a toxic mother-in-law, but because they've been emasculated, because they've witnessed their father being emasculated, they've almost, what's the term I'm looking for? Disarmed. They've been disarmed to say anything or know anything different. Would you agree, or am I?
No, I completely agree. I think this is it. If we think about the one ummah, we know the Prophet ﷺ in his last sermon reiterated 3 times, look after the women. And if you think about all the men that are responsible for a woman, so the husband to the wife, the mother, the father, all the different roles and responsibilities, and all the roles where a man is responsible for that woman, and exactly what you said, we're creating a generation of a weakened man. And it just takes for us to press that reset button, and that is by re-educating ourselves about our roles and responsibilities within our main guidance. When we say we're Muslims, we're submitting to Islam, and the Quran and Sunnah is the guidance. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a massive shift, and that's what everyone seems to be talking about. The buzzwords are, I want this, and in generations today, I think men are terrified to find the right woman because the right woman is now very toxic, feminist. Completely.
I'm glad you said it and I didn't.
It exists, and I do talk about this on my page as well, because I have a lot of women asking me about how to work on becoming more feminine. And
That's a tragedy within itself.
yeah, exactly.
It's like a man trying to say how to work on becoming a man, or a boy rather. Anyway, that was quite a bad analogy. In terms of the conundrum we face in this day and age, a lot of us are wedded to our parental houses or homes because of living in the southeast of London. The prices of renting is exorbitant, and buying a house, it comes with riba and interest. So unfortunately, some of us are lumbered within our parental houses and homes. And I think I spoke about this many episodes ago about, I feel sorry for the man that marries and he's the only son. And in Islam, it's definitely worth noting, you be dutiful to your parents. It's highly, highly honorable, and it's almost incumbent on that man. Equally, you be dutiful to your wife. But where there's instances where, at the end of the day, we're still ethnic minorities, and if you look at the statistics, all ethnic minorities in terms of what they're doing in terms of income and earnings, they still are at the bottom of the pecking order. So they're not making substantial amounts of money, first and foremost, which means you're lumbered in your parental home. Yes, I understand it's culture they've brought over, but regardless of whether you bring your culture over or not, because I think we're a lot more fluid now.
Yeah.
We pick and choose what we like, and I think that's a good thing. But for the man that's the only child, that's lumbered in his parental home, that needs to take care of his elderly parents, and he has brought this modern-ish British Muslim woman into his household, the dynamics will be completely different to if he were to marry an immigrant from where his parents are from. So my question to you is this: in those instances whereby you've got very old-fashioned mother-in-law, not using toxic, but she has this certain mindset because she has her own trauma that she's projecting now, and you've got this modern woman that's coming in, and she's not asking for much, she's just asking for her rights that Islam has stipulated. The son in the middle, it's quite easy to say the man is emasculated, but there are men that I know and I've heard of that are masculine men and are men of men. But what they don't want to do is upset their parents, because naturally their parents will play the sympathy card. Look at you. There's a term in our language called mauga. Look at you, or boitoli, which means, you're what's the English term for it? Simp. I think that would be the closest term used, loosely used. So if you are trying to give your wife your rights, in the detriment to your parents, your mum can easily turn around to you and say, is that what I raised? Is that why I've kept you 9 months? Almost guilt tripping, and it's passive coercion. Yeah. So for that man in the middle, where he financially has no choice but to stay in the house. He's got a modern British wife that only wants her rights. Unfortunately, he's got an old school mother of a woman. What do you say to that man? Because he's not emasculated. His mum, on one side, is guilt tripping him and passively coercing him, saying, "You're a bad son. You should be sticking up for me. I'm your mother. I've held you in my womb. There's no woman higher than me." On the other hand, his wife is saying, "You don't know your rights. You don't know my rights. You're not a man. You're not sticking up for me. You're not giving my rights." So what happens to that man? Because he will go through immense mental stress and pressure just trying to keep everything together, let alone try to woo anyone.
Yeah, I think you've kind of raised quite a few things. I want to come from it from quite a few angles, so
Sure.
bear with me.
Go on.
First and foremost, so from my own experience, when I started to experience such extremities of toxicity, and I could see very much that he was feeling quite compromised and didn't know which way to turn, and we weren't getting any closer. It was actually a really good friend of mine. And this is why when you choose a woman, make sure she has a good selection of friends who are always reminding her of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a friend of mine, she said, there are things that are happening to you. I would say really focus on doing it for the sake of Allah. And when you do anything for the sake of Allah, whether it's serving her and tolerating the abuse or whatever it is that you have to do on a daily, just do it for the sake of Allah and just watch how your life is transformed. Hearing that at the start of my marriage, I think couldn't have been it just was the most beautiful thing anyone could have said to me in that ugliness that I was going through. And for that reason, I persevered everything for as long as I did. Going forward with, I think if a man hasn't found someone yet, my strongest advice is, and I talk about it on my page again, be a 10 out of 10 for yourself. And that means work on yourself, mind, body, and soul. The soul aspect is working on your connection with Allah. Okay. So when you then realize and recognize who you are and how you present, then wait and know that Allah will send the right person to you. You attract like for like. When you've worked yourself up to that, at least the near enough to a 10 as you can in terms of your mind, body, and soul, you will find that you start to look for someone and you won't settle for anything until that person comes along and starts to sound just like you, but the opposite gender.
And I appreciate your advice, respectfully. I do feel like a lot of it is theoretical. I'm sorry if I can say with the greatest respect. If I can add to your point, I think men need to reprimand with justice. So if the mother's in the wrong, then you reprimand the mother in the noble way you should be speaking to your parents. Equally, if the wife is in the wrong, you reprimand the wife. There is a phenomenon now where women of this day and age, of marriage age, will come, and one of their conditions is that I will not stay in your family home.
I do find that quite sad, because if it's done in a way that everyone understands how this can benefit everybody, it can be done in a way that's actually really beautiful. Everyone gains from this. For example, for a young couple to come and live with a family and everyone just, having some ground rules to follow, and that has to come from the leaders of the family. If there are two men in the family, then there are two sets of leaders, right? So the man who's married to that wife and the man who's married to his wife. And you manage your own little family, but
You control your own
ultimately,
flock.
yeah, and ultimately in the
sense.
same household, you have some ground rules, and everyone has to respect and abide by those rules. I think when lines are crossed, just talking about it in a way that's very, easy to understand, using language that's simple, avoiding anything that just offends anyone, and just expecting everyone just to come back to neutral again. And it should be that simple, right? Ideally, if this couple then say, okay, can we stay in this family household for this many years, have a plan. And again, the leader
Yeah, they're
has to be a
saving
really
up
good
to move
leader.
out. They're saving
Exactly.
up to move out.
Or be at a stage where they can affordably, comfortably rent,
But would you say that, and I'm of this, if financially feasible, that if you can marry and move out straight away, you should?
If they are able to, absolutely. I think to
It
say,
will upset
yeah,
parents of our generation because they're old-fashioned and we live as a tribe, so everyone lives together. Unfortunately, we're not in a third world country, and it's not possible in this country unless you have a mansion.
exactly. I think back home they do have the separate quarters,
It's nice.
and
It's
it's all
different.
in a
It's
row.
different. But it's
Yeah,
different. We don't live in a third world
no,
country. I just want to say that divorce is skyrocketing, and I want to bring it back to this point because we need to have conversations that matter and do benefit our societies. Because I think there is a causal link between the stresses put into a couple's marriage and the external factors such as a mother-in-law that interferes and over interferes or intrudes in the couple's relationship. there's been a number of instances where I've heard personally that a son who's in a conundrum in the middle has been getting it from both sides, from his wife and his mother, and eventually he will take his mother's side. Most men will take their mother's side. It's, again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's, in my opinion,
Yeah.
naturally it feels like the right thing to do. You wouldn't desert your mother over your wife as much as you love your wife. So if there's disrespect happening, whereby you've inadvertently allowed your mother to disrespect your wife and cause her so many injustices, she's also a human being. She will disrespect your mother, right? Every action has a reaction. You in the middle in a conundrum, but the moment your wife disrespects your mother, I think that's a red line that there is no going back.
I think.
So
Yeah.
my question to you is this: the divorce element of things that are happening because of the mother-in-law, and I've already set out the scene about living in your family's parental home because of financial situations. I don't think everyone is doing it because of culture, but how do we avoid that moment, that point, when it culminates to that point whereby the daughter-in-law has disrespected the mother-in-law and there's no going back? How do you prevent it from getting there? Because when it gets there, the son invariably will choose his mother, and that the reaction to that is a divorce. How do you prevent it from getting to there?
Yeah.
In a situation where they can't afford to move out for the first few years, at the very least, they have to live with each other. They need to coexist and cohabit. Tell me.
Okay, first and foremost, everyone needs to fear Allah. Everyone's a test for one another.
Sure.
Okay, the son's a test for his mother. Parents are a test for their children. The wife and the husband are a test for each other. There is a way, a tariqah, okay? So the Surah Al-Baqarah outlines very clearly, okay? Because the marriage union is witnessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When those two people are saying qabul, it isn't for the people, it is when Allah is witnessing. These two people are coming into the union saying, I accept my roles and responsibilities, and similarly the other person says the same. If in this situation, the husband can see very clearly he needs to have been a husband to his wife, because sometimes our parents can get it wrong. And this is why you always respect your parents. And if they're getting something wrong, you go above them. And who's above them? Our beloved Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. If our beloved Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has clearly taught us, and the Sahabas at the time, whatever scenarios were going on, it's been recorded for us to follow as examples. And in Surah Al-Baqarah, there's a very clear set of instructions before it ends in a divorce. There are steps that you have to enact, implement, and ensure that it's been followed thoroughly. You can involve family in the first instance, and then there should be always resolution.
So, in terms of legislation, one of the rights of the woman is compromised from the outset if you don't give her her own place and her own abode to her. So that's already compromised. So you're starting from a disadvantage. Thanks for that. I've just got another question. I'm conscious we're short of time. In the instance, and this is to go into sister-in-laws now and even daughter-in-laws, we come from relatively medium to big families, alhamdulillah. So if there's three brothers, I'm giving you an example now, if there are three brothers that have been married, I've seen anyway, it's noticeable that the eldest daughter-in-law is the soldier. She withstands whatever needs to withstand, and she does everything. And you see the second daughter-in-law and the third daughter-in-law come in, normally younger, more of a modern mindset, and they sort of abscond. They don't help the eldest daughter-in-law, and they abscond. So that, I think, is also unfair.
Yeah.
If I've articulated myself properly.
Absolutely.
So the eldest daughter-in-law is doing all the work, and the second and third daughter-in-laws come in and they just become, footballers' wives,
Yeah.
wags. So I think that's an injustice within itself. I think, within a household, if there are requirements that people need to do, obviously we're not rich and we can't have maids and stuff like that. And we have to be realistic. You can't expect, and I feel free to comment and reach out to me. You can't expect to get married and be pampered as a woman.
I think, again, going back to what the Quran says about what a man has to provide, if he provides her a room and she's able to sleep and she's able to observe parda in the same household, really and truly, he's provided. So for that scenario where they're not able to move out and they're not in the financial situation to be able to afford their own place, if he has ensured her safety and well-being in the household, sharing with other family members, then he has ticked that box, and sisters need to be aware of that. There is some ridiculous rhetoric around, you know, the size of the house, the car, and the mahr, and all these things. I think get away from all of this, you know, the jokes around it, and let's get serious, because it's very, very simple.
What about dishing out responsibilities within a household? Because if a woman walks into a household and she joins this family, because it is a union of two, but you join that family, and your children will take that family's name. So we do need to live in the real world a bit. So if you come in, say you've got a masonette, or you've got a 4-bed detached house, and there's 3 brothers with 3 women there, and the eldest sister-in-law, daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law is cooking and doing all the chores, and then the second and the third daughter-in-law come in and they don't do anything, they expect to be pampered. That is also unfair. That's what my point is. It's unfair, and it's injustice to the eldest daughter-in-law. So my point there is this: you shouldn't expect to walk into anyone's household, particularly in the Muslim South Asia, or even Arab, you know, they're very strong in their culture and their roles and responsibilities, and expect you're going to be pampered like a footballer's wag.
Yeah.
You know, we're not English. You know, we don't follow secular ideals. We follow Islam, and we brought our own cultures over with us, or our parents and our forefathers have, and, you know, we take the good and leave the bad. But if for argument's sake, and I know we're running out of time here, if guests have come to the house, you know, and normal convention, it's not been oppression or asking someone to be a maid. Normally, the daughter-in-laws in the household, if there are only daughters-in-law, they will go and make the tea and the biscuit.
Yeah.
Now, if she then kicks up a fuss and saying this is not my role and responsibility, then perhaps she needs to take some blame as well for being too modern.
Absolutely. I think really and truly the girl's upbringing is really important. So I would just strongly urge those brothers, really understand, you know, when you're choosing your spouse, check in a little bit further about who the mother is, who her role model is, and what her upbringing has been like. Fundamentally, and we bring it back to Islam a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
And it is about that, choosing someone who is fearful of Allah, understanding that when she's coming into the marriage, she's asking you, what are your preferences? What would you like me to do? And really adhering to that, because you come into a relationship, it's all really well knowing your own rights, but you want to win your husband's heart, or you want to win your wife's heart. So how do you want to please one another? It is about outlining that very early on. How would you like me to be?
Incorporating the modern independent feminist ideal as well, because
I think it's scary times we're living in.
because it's actually normal now for a woman, when she is looking for a potential suitor, to say, oh, I demand X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
and etc. And it is a problem. Just tell me, without mentioning any names, because you have several cases coming to you on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis. What was the last case? Just the summary of it, and did it lead to a divorce because of it?
Oh gosh, this particular case, I was quite astonished to hear they'd been separated, and in that separation, she's fallen pregnant. So he's now living this comfortable life where this is a second baby. She's gone back to her parents. Her children are being raised by her family. He refuses to provide her own place. And he has the best of both worlds. He's still at home with his mum and dad, and he's got now a second child who his in-laws are raising financially. This is causing her turmoil, because her parents like, how could you?
I wouldn't say best of both worlds. He hasn't got a backbone.
This is it. He's emasculated by his own parents, because they've made it really clear you're not to bring this woman back. But somehow he's managed to go and impregnate her, and she's now in the situation where she's going, okay, we now have 2 children. Please provide us our own home. And he's saying no.
And oh well, thanks for sharing that. How big is it a problem within our communities? And more to hone it back into toxic mother-in-laws, is it still a problem now? Because I think the sort of natural disposition of girls and women that are looking to get married now is, I think, because of what they've experienced in their own household and how their own mother's been abused, they've become the complete antithesis to that, which means they've seen their mothers working, you know, day in, day out, chores upon chores, and to some, and it's all opinions, they work like dogs, and that's the expression that's used. And they think, right, I live in modern world Britain, I will never ever be like my mother and what she had to endure, go through. So how big of it is a problem? Because I do think that most women, 9 out of 10 women, and I'm not saying they're good or bad, they refuse to live with their mother-in-laws, firstly. And secondly, if they are living with their mother-in-laws, from your statistics, from the case that you've received, how big of a problem is it that is it causing marriage breakups, or are we finding, I don't know, some sort of middle ground?
No, definitely, it's still an ongoing problem. I think the generational trauma is continuing. I think I advocate for women to enlist the help of domestic help. I mean, I have sons as well, and in my ideal mind, everyone will, adhere to rules and regulations around the house. If you want to live, we all fear Allah first and foremost. We abide by the Quran and Sunnah. The minute any of my sons step up to say they're married, I will ensure that they understand that and accept the responsibilities that come with it. In terms of household chores, I pay for someone to come and help me with the
Right,
domestic chores.
right.
I work. There is no
Oh, so
reason
you're
why.
you're advocating that
If we're living in a modern world,
the boy
do
has
things
to
the modern
the boy
way,
has to carry his weight and needs to clean and cook and
if that's what him and his wife decide to do, that it would be down to him to decide how he manages his wife.
just quickly, and this has just popped into my head. When your son does get married, when he's of age and stuff like that, because of your experiences, because you're saying that your mother-in-law, she was treated in some way, which is why she treated in whatever
Yeah.
way she did. How would you then approach differently to your daughter-in-law when your son does get married? What would be a different approach? What would it be?
Absolutely supporting them both in the best way possible.
So you wouldn't
And
interfere and intrude.
no, I would not interfere and intrude at all. I would always ensure my son treats her with the utmost respect. And I've made it really clear to my boys, if they ever have a tear in their eyes, I will come for them. And then I will find out what the situation is. And then if they want my support, I'll support them if they want to deal with it by themselves entirely. But my sons have been raised to
So you
respect women.
Thank you. That's a very beautiful answer. I hope so that is the case. Just because you're the next generation, I'm not saying you're old, but you're potentially going to be the next generation of grandmothers,
Yeah.
right? So the mother-in-laws. So I think naturally over time, as decades go on, this situation of having immigrant mother-in-laws will come to a hold or cease to exist. But how far are we from that?
Well, if you look
10, 15
around,
years?
no, I think if you look around us, it is the amount of fitna, isn't it? Because for as long as people don't understand what we, represent,
Well,
and
I wouldn't say it's fitna. I think it's just immigrant mother-in-laws. They were brought up, their upbringing is a certain way. They were treated a certain way as wives and as
yeah,
daughter-in-laws, and they're just enacting it and carrying that tradition on. So I'd say within the next 10 or 20 years, they die out, and the new mother-in-laws will be women like yourself that were born here and have had a Western upbringing.
you're hopeful. I will still bring it back to Islam.
Okay.
I think if people educate themselves on what our religion is, I think that's where the healing begins. And like I said, ending generational trauma comes from understanding who your creator is and accepting that we're all a test for one another. And that trauma that continues, it comes from being oppressive. And that mindset isn't Islamic at all.
I think it'd be quite hard to tell a 70 or 60-year-old woman now, because you've been oppressed, you can't oppress me. They're set in their ways.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be quite hard for a son to tell his elderly mother, stop being oppressive. It's wrong. He should have done it from the outset. But thank you very much. Is there any final thoughts that you may have?
I mean, like I said on my platform on Muslim Women Issues, I talk a lot about healing using the mind, body, and soul approach. And anyone who's going through anything, I talk a lot and share posts and videos about it. So feel free to have a look and reach out if needed.
Thank you very much for coming on. Warm words. Very brave of you to share your own experiences and give us invaluable advice. I hope I could add to your conversation and have that conversation with you. And I hope it was beneficial. Thank you very much for watching. I think hopefully we can all draw or take some lessons from it, whether you're married or whether you're going through problems within your marriage because of your mother-in-law. And hopefully the idea is, in order to resolve these problems, we need to address them first. And I hope this is beneficial to our wider community, and it makes us understand that it's these small things, well, they may not be small, but these small things that chip away at us, and essentially it's destroying the fabric of our communities and societies, which starts with the nuclear family, which is the family structure. So this episode was to address the issues that some daughter-in-laws have with toxic mother-in-laws, and it's, I say this abundantly, it's not everyone, but I've experienced women of a elder generation that have come with a certain mindset, abuse their daughter-in-laws, and I think daughter-in-laws that are married now, they've seen what their mother has gone through and they're completely against it now. And I don't blame them, because they don't want the life that their mother had. Their mother was an immigrant that couldn't speak English, that couldn't work, that didn't have capacity. So if a woman of this day and age has all of that, why would she endure any of it? Thank you very much for watching. If you do have any stories or you've got any concerns or topics that you'd like to bring, please, our email is going to appear on the bottom of the screen now. Please reach out. Happy to have a conversation with me or my production team, and let's make this happen. Until next time, thank you. Bye-bye.